Good evening and welcome to this special broadcast which is brought to you by Government Communication and Information System. My name is Musutu Stone and it's unlike any other day. We're not doing this on Thursday as we are used to doing this every Thursday. Tonight it's Let's Talk Justice. It's a special program. It's the last program of this episode. So far over the 4 years we have done up to 90 programs talking about living your rights and also living and let live. Now tonight we're talking the declaration, the 70th anniversary of the declaration of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And South Africa is a country that protects and promotes human rights for all, as we know. And this year we're celebrating this 70th Universal Declaration of Human Rights, also referred to as UDHR. And on the 10th of December, which was almost like more than 50 years ago on yesterday, basically, the United Nations adopted the UDHR, and on the same day in 1996, South Africa also signed into law its constitution by former President of South Africa, Nelson Mandela. The UDHR and the Constitution of South Africa share much in common and in spirit, and principles and values as statements and of intent by humanity to stand up, to promote and to protect these rights. So we're talking that tonight, and if you want to engage us, ungakhuluma with any language in South Africa, ungabulabula, ungamba, ukabuwa, ungakhuluma, ungathetha on 0800 142 446 0800 142 446. And let me introduce my guest tonight. We have the honor of having Deputy Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, Ndate John Jeffrey. Good evening, sir, and welcome to this special program.
Good evening, and good evening to everybody listening. All
right, and also from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in South Africa, Abigail Noko.
Thank you. Good evening, and hello to all the listeners.
All right, and last but not least is the Advocate Bongani Majola, who's the Chairperson of South African Human Rights Commission. Welcome, Advocate, and thank you so very much for sharing this time with us. Siyabonga. As you can hear, I got diversity of voices, diversity of languages, as well as diversity of knowledge. So stay tuned to your favorite community radio station, wherever you might be, as we are reflecting on South Africa being part of the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We have two special things, DM, that happened on that day. One is the declaration that was developed back in the that was signed back on the 10th of December 1948, and we come into South Africa, we localize it. Our constitution was signed into power back then on the 10th of December 1996. So take us through that, DM, just a little bit of background in terms of where we came from, because back then I can imagine many of the people were on a struggle to have equal human rights in South Africa. And how does it go into the world? Was South Africa participating then? Just give us a bit of a background around that.
Well, thanks, Mosutu. The United Nations was set up at the end of the Second World War, rather. So I think the issue then was that to have a universal declaration of human rights for the world. At that stage, I understand there were 56 members of the United Nations. It was before decolonization, so the countries that were still colonized were not recognized, and they drew up the declaration. 48 countries voted in favor of it, in support of it. None voted against. 8 abstained. One of those countries was South Africa, because by that stage in December 1948 the National Party government had already started in power. I'm told that Jan Smuts, who was the Prime Minister up until then, was involved in the drafting of the Universal Declaration. how he reconciled what was in the declaration and the policies of his United Party government back home in South Africa. I don't know. The absence of a universal franchise for black people. But anyway, that's the history. But anyway, because of that, 10th of December then is International Human Rights Day. And President Mandela chose that as the day to sign the Constitution into law, which he did on the 10th of December 1996.
That's right.
And Sharpeville was specifically chosen to be the place where he would do it. Because of the Sharpeville massacre being a milestone in our history.
Yes.
So it's two issues in South Africa we celebrated on the 10th. The 22nd anniversary of our Constitution, and then as part of the whole world, the 70th anniversary of the UN Declaration of Human Rights.
All right. Thank you, Deputy Minister John Jeffrey, giving us a background on exactly how it came about that we are here 70 years down the line, and also 25 years down the line, celebrating two very big milestones. And maybe let me speak to Abigail about the office that you represent, which is Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. The UDHR, am I right to say the UDHR? Yes. So far, you are operating in a country that is taking human rights very valuably so, and also you need to integrate it into the continent and into other parts of the world. How does your office get to work with other organizations and constituted establishment like the SAHR, the Department of Justice, and all the other involved stakeholders in terms of making sure the promotion of human rights is adhered to?
Well, thank you, and thank you for the question. I think it's a big question, but if I can try to break it down, what I would say is that our office was established through a decision by member states. And if you look at that important document, what it basically says is that our office has been established in order to provide technical assistance to countries across the world. So what we do in that respect is that we provide assistance to governments, whether it be in this country or all over the world, in trying to strengthen national protection systems. And when we're looking at national protection systems, we're looking at what the state is doing, what the government is doing in terms of strengthening its ability to promote and protect human rights. We're also looking at strengthening, where they do exist, national human rights institutions, and where they don't exist, we try to support the establishment of national human rights institutions. And very importantly, we also work to support civil society as well. Civil society in terms of their voice, in terms of strengthening their capacity to interact with the different international mechanisms that are there. One thing that I would like to emphasize in all of this is that the most powerful tool that we have is the High Commissioner's voice. And as you know, the High Commissioner was here to commemorate the International Human Rights Day on Friday last week. And what she does is that she speaks on behalf of victims of human rights violations. So she has a very powerful voice that can interact, and we often use that voice to speak out on violations that might be occurring across the world.
That's right.
So for us, we see, this commemoration as a moment of pause and reflection, to think about the journey, this important human rights journey, where we have come from, in order to not to forget some of those very critical achievements that the global human rights movement has seen, and where we want to go to. But it's only in taking a pause and reflecting on some of the data that we can really begin to have an appreciation of what this human rights journey means, and in this context of South Africa, what it means for South Africa.
All right, thank you so very much. That's the voice of Miss Abigail Noko. She is part of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, which is based here in South Africa. Advocate Majola, let's get locally, where it has been a very, very interesting times, where we see people, racism in particular being one of those components that keep on cropping up its head, challenging our human rights situation in South Africa. But now let's take what your office is actually responsible for, because as Ms. Abigail has already alluded that they are more global focused, and with you heading this very important institution that has so many challenges to deal with, how do you go about it? Because I got some few stories that we will actually talk about as the show goes on, but let's talk about the office, what it represents, and what it seeks to do for our public in South Africa.
Thank you very much, Msutu, for the opportunity, and good evening again to listeners. I mean, the South African Human Rights Commission represents part of the framework that was established to support constitutional democracy in the country. We emerged from apartheid very severely bruised by what happened and damaged. And our the founders of our democracy felt that making assurances that they would uphold human rights was not sufficient.
Yes.
That there should be instruments such as the South African Human Rights Commission, the Commission for Gender Equality, and others that are to be the foundation and support the democracy and hold the government to account, you know, which in terms of Section 7 of the Constitution is required to see to the fulfillment of all these rights that are contained in what we call. So we were given then by the Constitution the power or the responsibility, if I may say, to promote the observance of human rights. And there are many things that we're doing in order to promote human rights. Among others, we have advocacy programs that we run all over the country. We have got offices in all 9 provinces, and each office has got 2 officials, one responsible for advocacy and the other one for human rights, is a human rights officer. They go out. We collaborate with civil society organization and other Chapter 9 institutions, by the way, to go out and educate people about their rights. We use the media to publicize cases of violations and pointing out why they are wrong. We do research. We advise legislatures when they make legislation where we think that the part of the legislation is going to be violative of human rights and so on. But we also do the protection aspect, where we intervene where the rights of people have been or are being violated. We intervene when we receive complaints, but also we intervene on our own. For example, in the case of Edward Zuma, we intervened on our own without receiving any complaints. We try to use alternative dispute resolution mechanisms because they are quicker, and because we find that people go out not being adversaries, but with an understanding and an acceptance of each other. The one saying, I was wrong, and I apologize, I now know that this is wrong, it violates your right, and so on. We observe and report on an ongoing basis on the observance of human rights in the country. We monitor the compliance by the state with its international obligations, and we comment when they make their reports. We speak with them when they are supposed to be reporting on those observations. Yes.
All right, you're still tuned to Let's Talk Justice, Living Your Rights. It's on a special day on Tuesday because last week there was the celebration of the anniversary of the declaration of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which started back on the 10th of December 1948. Now, DM, on Friday you attended the anniversary, and Can you highlight some of the points that people were actually making on a basis that we've come too far with this document, and things have been changing? We've got new technology, people are abusing each other online, we have all this new different way of living. Is it still relevant to follow the declaration as it is, or are we looking at adjusting it as per the generations as they come?
Look, I think the event last Friday, the other two, both Advocate Majola and Abigail were also present at the same event.
Yes.
I think the main point I'd want to make is that our Constitution, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Freedom Charter were two of the main documents on which our Constitution was based.
That's right.
I trust I won't offend Abigail, but the Universal Declaration is a historical document, a document from its time.
Yes.
Somebody at the event had, if you'd remember, spoken about it being a violent document, I think, in the context in which the youth use it. But the point that they made was that as far as gender equality, it doesn't say very much. And as far as LGBTI rights, it says nothing at all. But that, I think, probably needs to be seen in the context of what was happening in the world in 1948. I also look at it and I see, I can't find, many of the rights in the Universal Declaration are rights that we have in our Constitution. I can't find, maybe I missed it, a right to vote.
Oh, yes.
And I'm not sure if I'm correct, but that probably was a context of a world in which decolonization had not yet happened.
Yes,
and
yes.
I imagine the colonial powers were not particularly keen on that. Maybe I've got it wrong. Everyone has the right to take part in the government of his country directly or through freely chosen representatives. It's not as explicit as a right to vote, but I imagine that it would have been. I in fact wonder how the colonial powers could have hung on to their colonies for another decade plus, while having signed up for this declaration. But look, I think it's an important historical document. I think Abigail can say if it is. If it ever has been amended. Our Constitution, though, is something that is a living document.
Yes.
In fact, there's provisions in the Constitution that it needs to be reviewed every year by a committee of Parliament. And as you know, there's a process for amending Section 25, the property rights clause, that's underway in Parliament at the moment. And there have been 17 amendments of the Constitution since it came into law in 1996.
Yes.
So I think it is important that documents do reflect the times and human rights develop. So in 1948, women's rights were not particularly were not so much of an issue for the global powers, the governments at the time. And obviously LGBTI rights were not an issue at all. They are now in this 21st century. Maybe does that mean, and maybe I'd be interested in Abigail's comments, should the declaration be amended to reflect the times? That's something to talk about.
Yes, Sis Abigail, the same question to you, and with regards to probably we got 2-3 generations now since the establishment of the declaration, and things changed. Technology is ruling our lives these days, and a new way of life. Yet we still have some of the countries that do not observe human rights. I would like you to just consolidate that, to say, how do you evolve with the reality of life that is facing us in this day and age through the Universal Declaration of Human Rights?
Well, I would actually argue that I believe that the UDHR is as relevant then as it is today.
Yes.
And the reason why I say that is because there's still, if you look at the text of the Universal Declaration, I think most countries are still challenged by its implementation. And the first thing that I would like to also clarify is that the UDHR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, is an aspirational document, right? So it started off as the key foundational text where basically the world came together after the World War atrocities and decided that they needed to chart a document that would describe, that would reinforce the dignity and worth of all human beings, no matter what your gender, your sex, your race, your religious beliefs may be.
Yes.
And I think that is a very fundamental to the understanding of what this text it seeks to portray or invoke, as it were. And through that, then what happened is that we had two legal texts which translated this sort of aspirational document into international human rights obligations. And now those aspirational elements of the UDHR were translated into the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant on Economic and Social Cultural Rights. And together with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that is what we often refer to as the Bill of Rights. So basically and then if you look at the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, that's where you will find, for instance, the right to vote explicitly defined,
yes.
right? So I think that's the first thing that I would like to say. The second thing about whether it has evolved with time, yes, I think that it's fair to say that some of the language, perhaps if we look at it today, can be a little bit more gender sensitive. But there is one story that I would like to highlight, and that is the story of how we got to the very first article of this Universal Declaration. And if you look at it, it says, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Now, when the authors of this text started writing this Universal Declaration, I think the first version of it was all men, I think if I'm not mistaken, something along those lines of all men are born free and equal in dignity and rights.
Yes.
And it was actually a woman from India that insisted on changing the terminology to all human beings are born free and equal. And imagine, that was in 1948, right? And
yes.
I think there are these slight nuances that today have great meaning, because for me, that notion of all human beings, that basically essentially refers to everybody, whether you are a male, whether you are female, whether you are a transgender, etc., etc. I think that is the important element of that introductory piece that is Article 1 of the Universal Declaration. It is an all-embracing concept that refers to the dignity and worth of everybody, no matter what your background or beliefs or gender, etc., might be.
All right, thank you so much. Although you did not allude to what the DM was actually highlighting, which is the LGBTI part, which seriously needs to be included or maybe needs to be amended. I'm not sure what the process is, but those are some of the new dynamics of the new generation, where LGBTI has been declared as like any other human being. And there is that struggle as well of having to express themselves, having to contribute to positivity in life and all that stuff, which needs to be explicitly pronounced at some point through that. But anyway, let me give you a chance to think about that and get to advocate. Advocate, one of our challenges in South Africa, we have the most on-point constitution, as it is being commended by many countries and all that, yet we still have a very unequal country. And that seems to be one of the challenges with regards to human rights, which manifests itself in so many little things that are economic, that are social, that are political. And how is the SAHR, which is South African Human Rights Commission, take that head on? Because we have a serious challenge of inequality, just like your Brazils and others, but we are being looked at as one of the most unequal countries of this world?
Well, thank you very much. It's quite unfortunate that we are still that unequal as a country, and that we rank that badly in the world. The South African Human Rights Commission is quite concerned about that, and its programs are being migrated towards putting more emphasis on the realization of socio-economic rights, among other things, to try and reach that inequality. We also are dealing with issues that perpetuate the inequalities that were left by apartheid. I must say, though, that when we got our democracy, we did not have all the resources to reverse apartheid completely. And I think that it would be unrealistic of the Commission to say that all the inequalities should have been wiped out. We certainly believe that more could have been done. But we understand that the understanding was that these inequalities would have to be dealt with in a progressive manner, that reasonable plans and steps would be taken in order to try and remove these inequalities. There is legislation that goes a long way towards removing some of, if not all the inequality, but I think that it is going to take some time. What we are doing as the Commission, we are monitoring the trends in terms of complaints in the country. We report, we formulate programs in order to deal with that inequality. We're going to do more in terms of trying to, see to it that people have access to housing, to water, and so on. But it is going to take time. It's a very long-term project.
Okay, but is it change of attitude that is needed from our fellow human beings in South Africa, or is it a matter of convenience where the status quo favors one particular person historically and not the other, and not wanting to let go? What exactly is the actual problem of turning around this whole problem?
Well, I wouldn't say that it's I think, yes, there is an attitude of people not wanting to let go. Like, for example, people who do not want others to have access to land, and they're fighting tooth and nail. But the control of the economy is no longer in the hands of those people. Well, in a way it is, but of the government resources is no longer in their hands. So there is a measure of activity that one would expect to come from the state, to push the agenda forward. When you listen to what the government says, it says that much has been done, and yes, indeed, quite a bit has been done, but we believe that more could have been done, and therefore that perhaps there should be greater monitoring. Section 184.3 of the Constitution actually says that the Commission should, on an annual basis, go to state departments and find out what measures they've taken to achieve a progressive realization of each of the rights that are mentioned in Section 27, for example. And the Commission has resolved that it wants to do more and apply that section much more vigorously in order to push the agenda. Yes, the attitude is also important in the sense that you find that in some of the provinces, the absence, for example, of or the lack of medication or the long queues are created by the people who are in those provinces. A post becomes vacant and they decide not to fill it. Another one, becomes vacant, or they divert some of the budget that is meant for buying medicines and so on.
All right. 0800 142 446. 0800 142 446 if you want to join us in this conversation. If you want to know more about this 70th anniversary, I know many of you are actually like me. You came quite probably on the second or third generation of this of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So you might be wanting to know more. I got my guest, the Deputy Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, Ndate John Jeffrey, as well as from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Abigail Noko, and also Advocate Bongani Majola, who is the Chairperson of the South African Human Rights Commission. Also, Abigail, let's talk about the sovereignty of the countries and the influence that the office has with regards to trying to mold or direct or change the way the status quo. I could mention DRC, for instance. I could mention Equatorial Guinea. I could mention quite a number of countries. I could mention Botswana for having death penalty. I could mention a number of issues amongst different African countries. I might not just go to Europe as yet, but the strength of the voice of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in sovereign countries. How difficult or how easy or how amicable are you able to to implement these issues, or maybe take them forward through your office and the other countries?
Thank you and thanks for the question. I think the first and foremost, I would like to emphasize that that it's important to remember that the United Nations is not an independent body, right? We're there basically at the request of member states. So a lot of we were basically established. The United Nations Charter, which defines the work of the organization, is by virtue of member states coming together and saying we needed a United Nations. All right, so that already imposes a certain degree of limitation in terms of what the UN can do. We are often there to implement decisions of member states. When it now comes to our role, I often describe it as we are there to serve as a sort of a conduit between member states or governments, as it were, and civil society.
Yes.
So what we try to do is we really try to provide a technical assistance to governments in the sense that, you know, if they need capacity building or strengthening when it comes to their human rights implementation, we are there to provide that assistance in the same way that we are also there to channel requests for support from civil society or issues that civil society organizations might raise as human rights concerns.
Yes.
We have at our disposal what is often referred to human rights mechanisms, which basically include the fact that we have independent special rapporteurs, special experts that discuss different thematic or country situations around the world.
Yes.
They also have a voice, and they can also handle violations of human rights or complaints that might be happening at the country level. Now, in terms of the High Commissioner's voice, again, I think the beauty of our organization is that member states defined and agreed that there was a need for an independent voice when it came to human rights issues. So her voice is not subject to any sort of she basically speaks out on behalf of victims of human rights violations.
Yes.
And she does so in various forms. Sometimes she speaks to the member states directly in a meeting that is held once every 3 times a year in Geneva. She issues press statements. She either speaks through her spokesperson, and there are various forms. She advocates. Quiet diplomacy as well is another means in which one of our advocacy tools that we use.
Yes. And
all of this is intended really to urge increased protection for victims of human rights violations. So yes, often countries will say, "Oh, we're a sovereign nation," but in essence, the mandate that is given to our office is to have that independent voice. In addition to her voice, they are what we call thematic experts who also speak on a variety of subjects, whether it might be violence against women or freedom of expression, human rights defenders, and all these independent experts are able to also act as a voice that complements the voice of the High Commissioner.
All right. You can ukabolela Sepedi, you can mar Afrikaans prat, you can talk in Setswana, osa utlwa re choma go choma ke gore rotlhe re khona go utlwa so that we can all we're just speaking English so that everybody can speak, but everybody's welcome to express themselves in any South African language, and we'll be able to not sort of translate or anything, but to get an understanding of what you are actually talking about, because we all speak the same. And it's just a matter of dialect here and there. So 0800-142-446, 0800-142-446. And on the line from TEF, Komangkweng, we have Mato. How's Mato?
Hello, Mr. Son.
Hello, Chelekaina.
All
right, Badumeti said on my behalf, on their behalf.
Yeah, it's a long time that I participated in this Let's Talk Justice.
It's been a long time indeed. Welcome.
Yeah, it's been a long
Probably you participated in the last series or something like that.
I did.
All right.
Yes.
What's your point, Matlo?
I'm talking about these human rights because it's a very sensitive issue, Mr. Stone.
Yes.
But it mustn't sound like it's sensitive because it's something that people we do benefit from it as people of South Africa and the whole country. So I think when you look into this Bill of Rights, Chapter 2 of the Constitution, it does state that the state is the only parastatal or the only structure that must respect and protect the people and promote also the rights of the people. So I'm concerned about this phrase because it seems as if people do violate other people's rights because of this phrase. We must take all the responsibility as human beings to respect other people's rights. That's my concern to say so. And also the limitation doesn't stipulate further on the limitations per each human right. So I'm concerned about this limitation because they must indicate how this violation should be respected, because it seems as if when you violate someone's right, it seems as if you must be taking responsibility of that one, and also to ensure that you don't infringe other people's rights. So I think it must be further stipulated in the Constitution just to say the responsibility per se or per each human right, because it doesn't also state the responsibility, because we see people, especially those learners or people at schools, they don't respect these limitations and also the responsibility per each right. That's my concern, Mr. Stone.
All right. For your contribution, and thank you so much.
Deputy Minister, it must be reviewed. Yes. It's high time now that there must be a review.
Probably there should be more reviews, constantly than it used to be, because the world is moving quite very fast, Matlo. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. All right. Thank you. Dear, I think this one goes straight to you.
I think that the chair of the Human Rights Commission should also give a response, but none of the rights, all the rights have to be. None of the rights really can exist on their own. They all have to be balanced. So, my right of freedom of expression needs to be taken in the context of your right to privacy.
That's right.
And to dignity, and not to have somebody next door to you making loud noise in the middle of the night. So it is a balancing issue, and particularly one of the rights that a lot of people speak about is the right of freedom of expression, and that specifically is a right that does have limitations.
Yes.
The rights do apply to everybody. So, for example, the first right is on equality. that everybody is equal before the law, and the state may not unfairly discriminate, but it also is no person may unfairly discriminate directly or indirectly against anyone else on a set of listed grounds. So it does apply to ordinary people, and with equality specifically, and the chair of the Human Rights Commission, I think, can talk more about it.
Yes.
It's an issue that you can then take up with the Human Rights Commission.
Mm-hmm.
It's an issue you can go to an equality court to complain that you haven't been treated equally, and bring a case against somebody. And we have equality courts at every magistrates court.
Yes.
It's being extended to regional courts, every magistrates court, every high court. There would be an equality court where you can have your dispute heard, and to have some kind of then redress for your equality being violated if you are able to prove that.
All right. 0800-142-446, 0800-142-446. Advocate, please take us through Matlo's concern. She's saying it's a concern. It's got a comment on it as well. And she said quite a lot.
I think it's a very good observation that the understanding seems to be that when you have got a right, that's the end of it all. Whereas the rights have got responsibilities. The Constitution in Section 8 actually says that the Bill of Rights binds natural persons. In other words, whatever is said in the Bill of Rights, it means everybody else is bound. If it says that I've got a right to dignity, it means you are bound to respect that dignity, not to violate it. And so what I think is lacking is the understanding that we have got rights and responsibilities, and partly maybe because of the fact that we come out of apartheid, where we have been violated and so on, and the teaching and the emphasis has always been to say, no, you have got a right to speak, you have got a right to do this, and you've got a right to do this. We have realized this with service delivery protests, where people are disgruntled with the Department of Health, and they run into theaters and they stop operations in progress. They damage hospital property. They threaten patients. They throw dirt, and they prevent doctors from attending to what have you. That is because they believe that they have got a right, but they do not believe that the patients also have got the right of access to education. To healthcare. So what we need to do is perhaps emphasize now in our education that your rights come with responsibilities, and you are bound by the Constitution to actually respect these rights that are in the Bill of Rights, insofar as it applies to other people.
Yes.
I do not think that we need an amendment, because the Constitution already says so. And also just by interpretation, if when the clause in the Bill of Rights says I've got a right to life, it means that people should not take away my life. In other words, that others therefore have to respect my life.
All right, 0800-142-446, 0800-142-446. The Constitution recognizes that everyone is equal before the law and has the right to equal protection and benefit of the law. That's what the chairperson has just alluded to just now, to say if I live and let live in movie language. Malome Karabo would attest to that. Every time he gets his hair lights up the room. And Raymond is from Grahamstown. Hello, Ray.
Hello, Musoto. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you doing, my leader?
I'm good, thanks. And greetings to the leadership in the studio with you.
All right, they're just nodding. Probably they forgot it's radio, hey? Okay.
Otherwise, thank you very much for such an informative show. I think I'll be speaking on behalf of many other listeners that we learn a lot, especially with the celestial justice. But I liked when they started, they also gave a bit of a background, and I realized how much sometimes we do not take things serious because of lack of historic background that we have on them.
That's right.
My comment that leads to also a question would be, are there any road shows that are perhaps intended in terms of this issue of the promotion of human rights and for a deeper understanding? And my question now saying that, would it be something that perhaps as a country we need to be looking towards, to incorporation of the human rights into the curriculum, especially at an early age with this decolonized history, so that then perhaps kids, because one of the challenges is that at this moment people are using rights as per convenience. Whenever I can say it's my right, but then I do not care what I've done before or what I didn't do before, or how is that going to affect the next person. So perhaps would it be something that as a country we need to be thinking towards, that incorporation of this, so that then young people, as you said, there are number of generations that have passed who were on the forefront of this. Would it be something that would it help? Would it be something that as a country we need to be looking into introduction of a very deep historic background of this a piece of document that is very much celebrated throughout the world? That's just my comment, and perhaps a bit of a question there.
All right. Thank you so very much, Ray, calling from Grahamstown. Quite a very profound one, DM. And how do you respond to Ray?
We do need to include it, particularly with younger people, and we are trying to do that. For example, there's an annual schools moot that takes place every year. I think it's currently grade 10 and 11 learners. It starts with they get given a problem. I think the problem this year was a learner at a school who couldn't afford a school blazer, and who then was sent home by the school principal to say, stay at home until you get the blazer.
Yes.
And the process starts with the learners have to write an essay arguing one side or the other. Those then get judged, and provincial rounds are held, where the learners actually have to come and argue one side or the other, and it culminates in a national round where the final is held in the Constitutional Court. So it is a question of arguing both sides. And obviously the rights of the learner to be at school, even if she can't afford a blazer, versus the rights of the principal, the school governing body, to say, no, we want everybody to look the same here, so you must have a blazer.
Yes.
Now, that is being extended next year. Currently, it's schools participating on a voluntary basis. Next year, it's being extended to all learners. I think it's grade 9 and 10 or 8 and 9. I'm not entirely sure.
Yes.
They will all be writing as part of their curriculum a response to a problem that will be set, a similar kind of problem. And from this year, from next year, it's being taken over by the South African Human Rights Commission. They will be actually running it, although there's support from the Department of Basic Education, Provincial Education Departments, Department of Justice. So that's one of the ways, because I think it's good to get young people to think and to talk.
Yes.
And to argue each side. But maybe through you, Musutu, maybe the chair can...
The chair can also allude to that. We will come to us, Abigail, later on, with regards to contextualizing it at the global level.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Minister. I think you have highlighted one very effective way in which we try to publicize human rights and get everybody involved in human rights. What the Deputy Minister is saying is that when these kids then do the essays, they then involve their relatives and friends and so on. So more people then get involved in the issue of human rights. But what is even more is that when it comes to the moot court competitions, when they argue, the program has encourages schools to get assistance from local prosecutors, from local lawyers, from local magistrates and professors and so on, who then coach them, so it becomes a group thing, so that many people then get involved in the thing. And when they come to the Constitutional Court, you can see parents come, brothers, sisters come,
Yes.
and it's a big thing. On the other hand, talking about the curriculum itself, my understanding is that the Department of Basic Education is actually considering introducing a course or a subject on human rights at a grade which is going to be taught and examined for those learners. And so in answer to Raymond, I think that yes, something is being done. But finally, there are road shows. As I speak today, the South African Human Rights offices, some of the offices had issued statements saying that they are going out to certain areas where they are going to talk about human rights and the rights, and the responsibilities of people on a variety of issues that are in the Constitution.
All right, 0800 142 446, and working with me is Karabo Lance as well as Nontlan Tlandawonde as well as Levi Mudiba. Thank you so much. They are the ones who are making sure that everything is in place. You are able to hear us very well. I will come to you, Abigail, after speaking to Tsepo about also the 10th of December being International Children's Rights Day, and also to talk also about human trafficking, how it affects the work of your office as well. Where are you? So that we talk reality, we put reality into these components of the declaration as well. But let's speak to Tsepo. Tsepo is calling us from Klerksdorp. Tsepo. Morenaka. Bonta bosweu bo pep. Ke nnete. Okay, ba dumetse rra.
Because of
Nnete, thuto ke lesedi rra.
Seventieth.
70th.
Oh.
Yes, since 1948.
Since 1948. Wow. No man, the theory level haland, but mona khenyarona the right term di ka ka tsana go minimize re so ke go me hape ha re ke kana ba le go sheba ko mra go pele go ke testing pele go no go me ba ile ba di feteletsa, because ha o lebella ba tsa ntle ba diretse ngata mo ga rona ke kgatlana le ba tsa ba diretse ngata mo ga rona mona ha o lebella so that is singing ya diretse ngata mo ga rona ya diretse ngata go feta gona selo ba ba bang. So it is ka ba le review gape mo go se di ko mo ga rona ke tsetse le go kare go mo di ya fetella ke tsetse le go no go ga fetella ta mo go tsena go itse review go tsa mo go.
Okay.
Le mo ka sheba le bana re se go dikolo go sa di dikolo because of a gona ntwe a dira le bana ba go ba tebele mathiso ka dithipa ba itse ka se re se bana le tsone. So e ditse ka ba le review mo tseng tsa sa le tsone. So ke na ga tsone tse re ke le mogile thata ka ile ntse ke ba netse ga ka tsebe ke gona go ithuta ga ke tsena tsa.
Quite very profound, Morena Tsepo. Quite very profound indeed. Let's hear what the panel has to say about that one, right? Thank you to Tsepo. He's raising something here. He's saying maybe we need a constant review of these rights because they're getting to be too many. And too many to a point where he makes an example where the ill discipline in schools is no longer dealt with accordingly because corporal punishment is no longer. And the misbehaving of people around in terms of if I have more money, then I'm able to patronize those who do not have money. Like basically saying business actually violates so many rights of the poor, and including some of the politicians, of course, some of the people who are given the responsibility of leading our country into development. And also he's saying, are we able to possibly limit some of these rights? Number one. Number two, are we able to consolidate some of these rights so that they don't have to contradict each other, where somebody has a right to make money and then the other one has a right to buy from the other one? Yeah. All right, sorry about that, DM. Let me just take our last caller, Khadija from Cape Town. Khadija?
Yes, sir.
How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, sir. And yourself?
Baie dankie, baie goed asseblief.
Thank you for the program.
All right.
Any question on this program?
You can ask any question related to human rights on this program.
Thank you.
All right. You can go ahead, ma'am.
Yes. I've got 3 problems. That, my family was put out of a place where we lived in Plumstead. They have promised us places everywhere. They promised us a place, but every time we can't get the place. Now people are occupying the plot that they gave us. Then people in Constantia were given a place. Now there's disabled people on the ground. They're called SAHRC. They are on that place many years. That place was given to a family. Now how do we get our ground? Because people are getting older and they're dying and all that kind of things. And these people are staying on the place. They claim that they got this disabled people there. But shouldn't they find a place for themselves? I would really like to know if you can help.
All right then. Is that all, Khadija?
That is all, sir. All
right. Thank you. Listen to your radio as the panel is going to try to address the issue that you have at hand. Thank you so very much. All right. DM, because of the time, I would like you to just consolidate the two.
Look, on Khadija's problem, I don't know if we can get her number. Okay,
yes, we do have a number.
We can then follow it up in terms of finding out the specific detail. As far as Tsepo's issue, look, our constitution, as I said, is subject to an annual review. It's not something that should be cast in stone. It's a question of rights and responsibilities, but of the rights being balanced against each other. And the fact that the Constitutional Court is looking at the whole issue of corporal punishment in the home, corporal punishment in the school is already not legal. That doesn't mean that kids should be able to run wild and misbehave. It's issues of having to adapt and change how you deal with children. So I really want to make that point. I think that people will sometimes complain that criminals have too many rights, for example.
Yes.
But when they get arrested and believe that they're innocent, they're more than happy to have those rights.
Yes.
And sometimes they are innocent. Sometimes they're not. But that's the whole, a right to be presumed innocent. So,
Yes.
you appreciate the different rights when you need them. But I think the key issue for me is we need a society that is more respectful of the other people in society.
Live and let live.
Not just live and let live, respect other people. Treat them as you would want to be treated, rather than thinking you are the be all and end all, and you can do whatever you like, and it doesn't matter the impact it has on other people. I think that's the main message I'd want to say.
All right. Let me start with Abigail, and then I go to the chairperson. Your response to everything that has been said by Tsepo, as well as Khadija, as well as the children's rights versus the corporal punishment and all those. Where does the Office of the Human Rights Commission get in, and what is its role? How do you support this and make sure that between the South African human rights and yourselves, you are able to speak in one voice in making sure that this is taken in a common way of what is this, the common perception that we should be having?
Okay, and thanks to all the listeners again. There are lots of questions, but if I can try and unpack a couple of them at least, and maybe we can be invited back to another show to unpack some of the other issues.
All right.
What I will say, though, is when it comes to this issue about review, once countries have signed up to these international treaties, the office is responsible for providing the Secretariat service for the committees that basically review compliance with the human rights as contained in that specific treaty. So if you look at South Africa, for instance, they were recently subject to review of their compliance with the International Covenant on Economic and Social Cultural rights.
Yes.
And those rights have to do with issues around right to water and sanitation, right to health, those types of economic and social cultural rights. So there is a mechanism in place to ensure that there is, protection and promotion of rights in those areas. And what those committees also do, they provide recommendations. So they make observations to say, well, we note that in the area of water and sanitation, there have been recent incidents that need to be addressed. We would recommend that in accordance with international standards, you may wish to consider adopting these policy measures, these legal measures if it's a question of reforming national legislation. And we also do what we call sharing of best practices. So we might want to look to another country and say, well, X country has done it this way, you might want to consider doing it in that manner. And through that process, the whole idea is that periodically they're supposed to come back and basically attest to what it is that they've been able to do in terms of their implementation, and then to do that follow-up. So that there is, it's not like countries just sign on and then they just forget about it. There is mechanisms in place to ensure monitoring and compliance with those issues. Now, in terms of competing rights and this type of thing, again, as the Deputy Minister has already indicated, the whole principle behind human rights is this idea that we are now using in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals, that nobody should be left behind, that it doesn't matter whether you are rich, whether you're poor. There is a basic standard when it comes to being a human being, and that is the dignity and worth of everybody. And these rights are basically speaking to what the minimum standard must be. That nobody should be left behind when it comes to the enjoyment of these rights. And the other thing that I would also like to emphasize is that, so there's this idea that they are universal, right? So that concept of universality is really critically important. The other concept that is fundamental to human rights is this notion that they're indivisible. So you can't have one without the other. It's not like you can enjoy your right to health without the right to education, right? They need to really be seen as something that are complementary, that one is reliant on the other. Otherwise, there is retrogression in that respect.
Yes.
And so this idea of indivisibility and also interdependency is really quite fundamental to the human rights principles. When it comes to issues around children's right, trafficking, and that type of thing. I think that is, like a whole another discussion, but I will say that there are special protection measures that the human rights provide for when it comes to children, and in particularly when we're talking about in the issue of trafficking. I mean, there's several issues that we're concerned about as the United Nations when it comes to trafficking. What we basically essentially do is we translate trafficking into different sets of violations that might be taking place. And those violations relate to the violation of the right to life, the right to liberty and security of person. In some instances, it might be a violation of inhuman and degrading treatment. The list really goes on. And that's how we try to unpack some of these notions of, trafficking, because on its own, it doesn't really mean anything. And the requirement is to ensure that there is no violation of those rights as I've just described them, whether it is when it comes to inhuman treatment, whether it becomes into security of person, and et cetera, et cetera.
Now, what is, let's just put one particular example. What is your conversation with the government of Nigeria when you are discussing Boko Haram, for instance?
Well, I mean, of course, interestingly enough, we did actually do a report that was mandated by the Human Rights Council a couple of years ago into the situation of what was happening in the northern part of Nigeria. What we would typically do in such a situation where there are violations of that nature taking place, we tend to sort of monitor what's going on. First, what's very primarily important to our work is to have a very clear understanding on what are the facts on the ground, because sometimes you have different types of reports that can't be corroborated. We try to gather information from victims of human rights violations, and we try to establish a fact in terms of a pattern of violations that might be occurring. And when with the information that we are able to gather, it's a typical human rights monitoring and reporting type of work that even a national human rights institution would do in its own given country. What we then do with that information is that we indicate where we might have received allegations of different types of human rights violations. So we try to categorize them into different violations that are taking place. And with that, then, it becomes then an advocacy tool to work with the government to say, listen, we have noted based on the information that we're gathering on the ground that these are the violations that are taking place. And we would suggest or recommend a set of measures in order to address the situation.
All right.
And in that way, we use that information to continually work towards advocacy, working with national actors, civil society, and government to try and see how we can redress those situations.
All right. Thank you so very much. Advocate, your last word on this and your response and all that, and thank you so much.
Well, I wish to thank you and to thank the listeners for giving us the opportunity to meet today and have this conversation. But going back to the question from Tsepo, I think that I would like to align myself with what the Deputy Minister has said.
Yes.
And then in addition, I'd like just to say that we are dealing with a constitution, a document that is actually supposed to last for a very long time and create stability in a country. And so I wouldn't rush towards reviewing and changing the provisions of the Constitution within a very short period of time. What is lacking in South Africa are dialogues, indabas, where people in a town, they have a town hall where they talk about this issue of corporal punishment. What does the Constitution say? They get experts, they get ordinary people to talk about it and so on, to see whether there are no other ways that can be found to solve the problem other than just beating up the kids. And if there are no other ways, then to voice that. But I also am aware that, our constitution is still under interpretation. We are still getting interpretations of the equality clause. We getting interpretations of many other things, including the whole issue of corporal punishment. And my sense is that perhaps we should allow that process to run while we review the constitution, but not easily or lightly change it, because I think that frequent changes to the constitution may create confusion and therefore instability in the legal system.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Deputy Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, Ndate John Jeffrey, Advocate Bongani Majola, the South African Human Rights Commission Chairperson, and from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Abigail Noko. Thank you so very much for your insight on this topic, and also thank you so very much for enlightening our communities. And to the communities, I would also like to say, live your rights. The UDHR empowers us all. The Constitution Bill of Rights is the cornerstone of our democracy in South Africa. The human rights are relevant for all of us on a daily basis, and the Constitution recognizes that everyone is equal before the law, as well as our shared humanity is rooted in these universal values. And I am simply because you are. From Mosotho Stone tonight, it's a good night.